Visual Studio Code working with GitHub. VS Code has Git integration and can work with existing repos on services like GitHub. When no folders are open, its source control functionality gives access to clone repository. This will also show up in Explorer and can prompt to log into GitHub and then work with those functionality directly. If a folder is open and it contains a .git, a .git subdirectory, Visual Studio Code will allow for all Git functionality like creating commits and then pushing and pulling those same commits. If the repo is a fork, Visual Studio Code can also be used to rebase a copy with its original source. So let's look at two different examples then. Let's look at first when a folder is not opened, and we can have the existing functionality to look at cloning a repo directly from GitHub. And then let's look at what if a folder is open and it contains a subdirectory for working with a Git project. So the first example then is right here. When we have Visual Studio Code open, it has nothing open right here, and I have closed any existing folders. So notice when I have Explorer open over here, it says, oh, you can open a folder or clone a repository directly from a URL. If I move down to source control, as I mentioned in the introduction of this video, we have the same options, open a folder or clone a repository. If I click on this, it will give me the option right here of a URL if I had a URL to an existing source, or I can clone from GitHub. I've previously logged in, so then it lists all of my current repositories that I could then clone locally if I wanted to. I don't currently want to do that, but I wanted to show that functionality. So we can log into GitHub, or that is, at least grant Visual Studio Code the ability to access our GitHub account and clone repositories directly from VS Code itself. Now, what if we had, using either the Git command line software suite of tools or using GitHub Desktop or some other application, set up a project that existed on GitHub that we wanted to work with? Well, in a separate example, let's look at that. So this is an existing folder that was previously cloned using GitHub Desktop. So notice it has a listing of files within here, and it also has a git ignore file, which tells us it's probably using Git. If we weren't totally sure, then we could go to source control and notice that it looks different. Instead of asking us if we want to open a folder or clone a repository, it understands that this folder right here exists as a project and also exists as something that talks via Git. Notice it has a very similar interface for those who have seen GitHub Desktop for working with source control, hence its name. So if I made any changes to these files, and so for example, I will make a quick change and then saved this file, notice not only do I see the change appear right here, notice it's a different color, but over here in source control it says, hey, you have exactly one change. Here are the changes you've made to the README file, and then if I wanted to, I could enter right here a message. So the message right here is a summary, not the description, so a summary for this commit if I wanted to commit that change. I could then, if I wanted to, commit it by clicking the check mark and then deal with the existing verbs we've discussed in previous videos. I could commit that, that is, send it to GitHub. I could then push or pull that change if I really wanted to, pull it, that is, rebase it from a previous repo, given that this was a fork, or I could push it to another branch or existing repo. I could create another branch if I wanted to, merge, publish, rename, etc. And of course, add different remotes. So all of the existing functionality of working with Git, and especially GitHub, exists within Visual Studio Code. It looks a little different from those who have previously used GitHub Desktop, but all of the functionality exists within here. It's just a matter of learning what Visual Studio Code calls it. So again, if we made changes, it would show that, oh, how many changes are made. Notice I put the cursor here, it says one pending change. I would give it a message. This is equivalent to a summary of those changes. I could then commit it if I wanted to, and again, using our existing verb set from the previous video on terms and concepts, we could push or pull those changes. So let's review what we've talked about. Visual Studio Code, VS Code, has existing Git functionality. If we don't have a folder open, it will give us the opportunity to either open a folder or clone an existing repository. If we want, we can log into our GitHub account if we have one. That will give access to our existing repositories on that service, which then we could clone locally if we wanted to. If we have an existing folder which has a .git or a Git saved folder, Visual Studio Code is smart enough to realize that this exists as a project that speaks Git, usually dealing with GitHub or another service like that. So in that case, if we make changes, it will track those changes. We can then create commits and deal with the regular verbs that we already understand between different repos, that is pushing, pulling, and rebasing, making them in sync from an original to a new copy.